I am Matthew Silverman, the Executive Director of the Haberman Institute for Jewish Studies, and I'm thrilled to welcome all of you to our program with Kenneth Hoffman, where we will explore the Museum of Southern Jewish Experience. We are excited to offer this learning experience and hope that this time together will be an opportunity for each of you to learn about Southern Jewish life and maybe connect the history or narratives to your own Jewish story. A couple of technical notes. We will have some time at the end of the program for questions. Please send any questions to the Q&A moderators in the chat. Given the large number of attendees, we will not be taking questions live. Also, we are happy to forward any questions or comments to the speaker, but please try and keep questions as succinct as possible in order to be asked live. Now, I am delighted to welcome Kenneth Hoffman, who was born in Houston and raised in Baton Rouge. He earned a BA and MA in history from Tulane University and spent a year studying at the University of Bristol in Great Britain. Kenneth worked as a grant writer for the New Orleans Museum of Art and as the curator of education at the Louisiana State Museum. From 2004 to 2006, Kenneth served as president of the Louisiana Association of Museums, leading the association through the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. He recently ended an 18-year tenure as Director of Education at the National World War II Museum, which he helped open on June 6, 2000. Kenneth is currently the Executive Director of the Museum of Southern Jewish Experience, which opened in New Orleans earlier this year. And now I would like to welcome Kenneth Hoffman. Hi, Kenneth. The screen is yours.
Hey everyone, thank you so much, Matt, and thanks to the Haberman Institute for inviting me to share some of the story of the museum and a little bit of the history that we tell. I was looking at some of the faces of folks that are on, and I see that one of my board members is on the call, and the brother of our museum, the chair of our museum is on. So hello to you two in particular. I was told I have 3 hours. Is that correct? Just kidding. Just kidding. Haha. I'm going to talk for maybe 45 minutes, but it's going to fly by because I'm going to be showing you the museum, or at least some of the museum. I don't want to give it all away, because what I really want is for y'all, when everybody feels safe and comfortable, I want everyone to come down to New Orleans and see our wonderful museum, which opened just a few months ago at the end of May 2021, right in the middle of all this mishigas. We were able to get open, and we're very excited to share the stories that we have. And speaking of sharing, I am going to share my screen now. Can y'all see my screen? Matt, can you see my screen? All right, so there's our building. There's our logo. I always like to start with that. You can see that we put a Jewish star right in the word Southern, because Jews have always been in the South and a part of the South. And then we have this wonderful tagline, Shalom, make yourself at home. You may have a magnet on your refrigerator or a coffee mug that says Shalom, y'all. We love that phrase. We sell things in our museum store that say Shalom, y'all. But it's a little bit, everyone uses that. So we came up with Shalom, make yourself at home. The idea is that we are a welcoming place, not just for Jews, not just for Southerners, but for everybody to come to the museum and feel like they are part of the Southern Jewish experience. So before we get into the meat of the story, let's have a little bit of fun. It's already past noon, y'all's time. Here it's still morning, but that's okay. We can have a little fun, a little drink, and answer a couple of questions. Which city had the first synagogue outside of the original 13 colonies? Was it Savannah, Georgia, Mobile, Alabama, or New Orleans, Louisiana? Now, I don't think you're able to unmute yourselves, so just think about it in your mind, see if you know the answer, and I will tell you that it is New Orleans, right where I am, 1828, what today is Touro Synagogue, the first organized congregation outside of the original 13 colonies. Mobile is an interesting place because Rabbi Joshua Haberman actually had a pulpit in Mobile, Alabama at one point. Question 2. Which sweet treats trace their kosher roots back to Savannah, Georgia? Is it Girl Scout cookies, Goo Goo clusters, or moon pies? All delicious things. The answer is Girl Scout cookies. When Juliette Lowe started the Girl Scouts in the early 20th century, she asked 4 of her friends in town to become troop leaders. 3 of those 4 women that she asked were Jewish women. Later, when the Girl Scouts started selling cookies to raise money, they went to the best bakery in town. It was Gottlieb's Bakery, a kosher bakery. And ever since then, Girl Scout cookies have been kosher. So if you've ever had a Thin Mint, then you have had a Southern Jewish experience. And finally, last question, which African-American musician was taken in by a Jewish family at age 7 and given his first instrument? Was it Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong, or Buddy Bolden? The answer is Louis Armstrong. At 7 years old, he was taken in or looked after for a while by the Karnofsky family, a family of Lithuanian Jewish immigrants. They fed him, they let him ride on the back of their rag wagon as they went through town. He would toot on a little tin horn. And they didn't give him his first instrument. They lent him $5 to buy a cornet, a used cornet. And he paid them off by working for them. And ever since then, for the rest of his life, he wore a Jewish star, a Mogen David necklace, to remember the kindness that the Karnofskys showed him. So these are just 3 little stories that kind of show how Southern Jews, Judaism, the South, has always been part of the American experience in one way or another, sometimes in very surprising and unexpected ways. Now, a question we get a lot is, well, what do you consider the South? What we consider the South are 13 states: Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia. Some of y'all are probably in Virginia right now. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. And of course, our museum is here in New Orleans. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, Oklahoma, why is that? Why do you do that? Or how come you don't include Maryland and Delaware? They're south of the Mason-Dixon line. All kinds of questions about what is the South. Mostly valid. Lately, several people from West Virginia have been saying, how come you didn't include West Virginia? The answer is because this is what we include. That's as good an answer as we need. There's a wonderful Jewish museum in Maryland, as you guys know, in DC. The Capitol Museum, the Lillian and Albert Small, will be opening soon. Wonderful place there as well. The next question people ask me is this a new museum? Because it seems like I've heard of this museum before. And they're right. The museum was originally at Jacobs Camp, Henry S. Jacobs Camp in Mississippi, which is a Jewish summer camp. That alone is a strange sentence for many people, a Jewish summer camp in Mississippi. But it's the site that in the 1980s, the camp director started collecting Torahs and menorahs and things from congregations that were quickly disappearing from small towns across the South. And they built a little museum, and it was a great place for the campers to learn about their culture, their heritage, their history, but it was very out of the way for the general public. And so it wasn't very accessible. So they decided to find a new place for it. They chose New Orleans, because New Orleans is a big tourist town. It's got a rich Jewish history. It has Tulane University, which has a high population of Jewish students and a great Jewish studies program. And just to show that that I am part of the Southern Jewish experience, there I am as a camper at Henry S. Jacobs Camp back in the day, and then later as a counselor when I was a student at Tulane. So that's proof. Now, here is our building today. We don't have the whole building. We have a long-term lease on about 13,000 square feet of the building. And currently, we have an option to grab half of the third floor. And we're really excited about that because we have some very important work to do that we need room for, mostly about oral histories and archives. So if you know someone who would like to see their name on half a floor of a Southern Jewish museum, I'll give you my email address at the end. If you've been to New Orleans, then this gives you a sense of where we're located in the city. I went up to the roof, I took this picture. We're very close to the National World War II Museum, where I used to work, to other museums like the Ogden Museum of Southern Art. Behind me, where I was standing, a few blocks, is the Southern Food and Beverage Museum. So we're right in the heart of the city, on the streetcar line, on the hop-on, hop-off bus line. So it's a great place for visitors to come see. The building is old, over 100 years old. We did a complete renovation of our portion of the building, and we turned it into what you're seeing here. This is what we had when we showed up, when we first got the building, and we turned it into a world-class museum with world-class exhibits. And that's what I want to spend the next few minutes talking about and showing you, is a little walkthrough of some of the stories we tell. We start out by helping the visitor understand where Southern Jewish history fits into the larger Southern history and American story, because Southern history is American history. Can't have one without the other. And so we place them in a time with a timeline, with some important aspects, some important things that happened. Not everything, but just to get them situated. And one of my favorite things to point out is that in 1654, that's when the first Jews arrive in New Amsterdam. But if you look at the very first entry there, and I'm going to move y'all's heads so I can say 1585. In 1585, that's when the first Jews show up in the Virginia colony. So it's long before, not that it's a contest, but Jews were in the South long before they were ever anywhere else in the country. Oh, wait, let me just go back for a second. Some other interesting points on this timeline. The very first Reform congregation in the United States was in the South, Charleston in particular. The very first book published by a Jewish woman in North America was in the South. So there are some interesting ties between American Judaism and Southern Judaism that we talk about. Immigration. We start off by explaining different waves of immigration. First, the Sephardic immigration, followed by the Alsatian immigration. Louisiana in particular has a large Alsatian Jewish population. Well, by large, not large like New York standards, but because Louisiana started as a French-speaking colony, there were connections to France and Alsace. So that's what this prayer book is. It is a prayer book brought over by an Alsatian Jewish immigrant, and it is in Hebrew and French. And just like anybody, or Jewish or non-Jewish, who will take a Bible and write important family dates in their Bible, we see here that the Hirsch family has done the same thing with their prayer book. So we talk about the Sephardim, we talk about the Ashkenazi immigration, to get people to understand that there is some diversity in the Jewish community. If I ask 10 people to give me their mental image of immigration to the United States, I bet you 9 out of 10 will say Ellis Island. And that makes sense because millions of immigrants came to the United States through Ellis Island. But some came through the Ellis Island of the South, which was Galveston, Texas. And Galveston, I don't know if y'all can see my cursor, but Galveston, Texas is right down here. Whoops, I'm click happy today. With the overcrowding of immigrants in the Northeast, there was an effort to divert Jewish immigrants from the Lower East Side down through Galveston. And between 1909 and 1914, 10,000 Jewish immigrants came through Galveston and then moved on through Texas into Missouri, into Oklahoma, into Kansas. And a lot of Jewish families in the Midwest today can trace their heritage back to immigrants who came through Galveston. And so we have this trunk on display from a Jewish immigrant who came through Galveston. The photo shows Rabbi Henry Cohen. He's the man with the skimmer hat there and the mustache. He was the rabbi in Galveston in charge. He would meet the immigrants at the docks. He would arrange for them to travel on to other communities, to get jobs, to get housing, etc. You can't talk about Southern history, or really American history, without talking about race. It's the blanket that covers everything. And as you know, if you read the news today, it is still an issue that is a part of our national conversation. And so we cover it as well. Race, slavery, the Civil War. American Jews in the South owned people. They owned enslaved people at about the same percentage as non-Jewish white Southerners. They took on the trappings, the racial hierarchy of the communities they were in. This isn't the most pleasant history to talk about, but it is part of the history and it's important to talk about. So we talk about Jews who fought in the Confederacy, Jews who were slave owners or slave traders. This $2 Confederate note pictures Judah P. Benjamin. He was a Louisiana senator who resigned when Louisiana seceded. He became eventually Secretary of State of the Confederacy and was known as the brains of the Confederacy. And he was on the $2 Confederate note throughout the war. And we have a couple of different notes that he was on. They changed it, throughout the war. They changed what the bills looked like, and we have several on display. It's important to talk about these issues, particularly when non-Jewish people come in, particularly when non-Jewish people come in who have heard misinformation that Jews ran the Atlantic slave trade. A lot of that kind of misinformation is out there, and we make sure to tell them the correct stories. After the Civil War, Jews in the South become much more important as merchants and peddlers, retail and wholesale. The South is an agricultural region. These Jews have come from Europe mostly, having not been allowed to own land for hundreds of years. Were not allowed to be in the guilds for hundreds of years. So they had honed their mercantile skills and their connections, and they came, and in an agricultural region, the farmers needed the merchants needed the farmers, and so there was a connection. There was a reason that Jews were coming to the South and succeeding and being accepted. Here's some of the wonderful items that we have. We have a lot of things from people's family stores, their dry goods stores, everything from tiny little shops that sold everything in Shaw, Mississippi, to items from department stores like Saks in Birmingham, or Neiman Marcus that was started in Dallas, or Rich's in Atlanta. We spend time talking about how Jews became Southerners, which means that after they established themselves economically and they were secure and they, weren't going to starve to death, then they could start participating in the civic and social life of their communities. Sometimes they were not allowed to do that. There were some places in the South, in larger cities in particular, where Jews were not allowed into the social clubs or the business clubs. And so they started their own. This is a story, this happened in the Northeast and all over as well. And we get progressive clubs and Concordia clubs set up that then later become JCCs and other kind of Jewish centers. But for the most part, in the small town South in particular, where people live more closely together, there was greater integration of Jews into the culture around them. And we have a map that shows, I can't remember if I have a picture of that. I'm going to look down real quick. Hold on. No, we don't. We have a map that shows over 200 southern cities that have elected Jews as mayors, which shows that, there really was a high level of acceptance of Jews in their communities. A place like Galveston that I mentioned earlier has had 5 Jewish mayors. And I'm not talking about in the late 20th, 21st, or early 21st century. I mean in the early 20th century, and sometimes in the late 19th century. Donaldsonville, Louisiana, not too far from New Orleans, has had 5 Jewish mayors. The first 2 mayors of Dumas, Arkansas, where our board chair grew up, the first 2 mayors of Dumas, Arkansas were Jewish men. When we tell visitors that, it's like they want, how is that possible? And it's possible because these were civically minded citizens of the town, and they were accepted, and they were hardworking, and they had something to contribute to their communities. So the quilt I'm showing is one of my favorite objects. It was made by the Jewish Ladies Sewing Circle in Canton, Mississippi in 1885. They all sat around, they made this crazy quilt. They sewed on patches and they stitched their names into the different squares. And they created this beautiful quilt to raffle off to raise money for the synagogue. So A, it's a beautiful piece of textile history, but B, it's a really beautiful metaphor for a community coming together, working hard, putting in their creativity to create something that then benefits the community. So we love that metaphor, and we revisit it at the end of our exhibit, and I'll show you that in just a couple of minutes. We have an entire gallery called Foundations of Judaism that's not chronological, it's thematic. It is a great place for non-Jews to learn what Judaism is. There are people that come into our museum that have never met a Jewish person, that have maybe heard of Rosh Hashanah. Yeah, I've got this friend at work, and every September he misses a lot of days of work. What's that all about? And so we talk about, what are the Jewish holidays? What are the Jewish life cycle events? What are the beliefs and the symbols? But all of the images and all of the artifacts in this gallery are from Southern Jewish families and Southern Jewish communities. So the Kiddush cup that my father made Kiddush over every Shabbos is in this gallery. That's one of the perks of being the director. And we have these beautiful reproduction stained glass windows from different congregations across the South. So it's really just a beautiful, beautiful gallery. We have Torahs. We have a Torah from Port Gibson, Mississippi. We have a Torah from Laurel, Mississippi. We happen to have a lot of stuff from Mississippi because that's where the museum, first started. We have some great, really fun interactive elements. A Jewish quiz, a Yiddish word matching game. People are amazed that when you say, do you speak Yiddish? And they'll say, no, of course I don't speak Yiddish. And we'll say, what does it mean if I say I had to schlep my kids to soccer practice? And they'll say, okay, well, I know what that means. And there's a lot of words in English that come from Yiddish that people use. So we have a lot of fun with that. Then we move into our third gallery and we get back into chronology. We enter the 20th century, again with a timeline, puts people in the right time and place: World War I, World War II, Prohibition, the Civil Rights era. And we talk about how, again, Southern Jewish history intersects with the broader American and world history. And there's some really interesting things here that I'm not going to go into. You can come to the museum and you can see them. It's in this gallery that we have two special places. One, we talk about the Holocaust, not so much a history of the rise of Hitler and Nazism and the camps, not so much that. There are some wonderful Holocaust museums around the South. This is more an exploration of how Southern Jews reacted to the Holocaust, how they tried to get relatives out of Europe before the war, what they were reading in their Southern newspapers about what was happening. We have wonderful oral histories of survivors who moved to the South after the war and made new lives for themselves in the South, and again contributed to their communities. And then we have a civil rights gallery, which talks about Southern Jewish experience during the civil rights period. But what I love is this photo mural. It's big, it's the whole wall that you see here, because it ties these two stories together. This is Ernst Berinsky in the picture here. He was a German Jewish professor. When Hitler kicked out the Jews out of the universities in the early 30s, a lot of them came to the United States. And they found in some ways that they couldn't get jobs here either, because many universities here had quotas on how many Jews you could have on your faculty. So more than 50 of these German Jewish professors found jobs at historically Black colleges and universities. So here is Ernst Berinsky teaching War and Peace, Tolstoy's War and Peace, to students at Tougaloo College in Jackson, Mississippi. So it's a wonderful connection between the Holocaust story and the civil rights story, all wrapped up into a Southern experience. So here is part of our Holocaust gallery. We've got the image, we've got the reproductions of the letters to the State Department and the affidavits saying, I will take care of this person, my cousin, if you will let him come to Little Rock, Arkansas. We have artifacts from Southern Jews who fought in the war in the United States military. We have, since we have 13 states that we cover, we have one survivor story from each state, where we've paired their picture during the war with a picture of them later in life when they were sharing their stories. It's a very meaningful and powerful exhibit. This is our Civil Rights Gallery. We have a wonderful nod to Southern Jewish women who were activists, not just during the civil rights period, but throughout Southern history, either as education reformers or civil rights activists or reproductive freedom activists. And then we talk about how Jews interacted with the civil rights movement in the South. There are some wonderful stories. There's a picture there of Rabbi Rothschild with Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta. But there are also stories of Southern Jews standing aside and not wanting to make waves. The synagogues in Jackson, Mississippi, and Meridian, Mississippi, in Atlanta, Georgia, many in Florida were dynamited by the KKK because of Southern Jewish, or because of rabbis speaking from the bima, from the pulpit, about, in support of civil rights. So many Southern Jewish communities were cautious and fearful to speak out for integration and for desegregation and for civil rights for African Americans, out of fear of a backlash. And then, of course, there were Southern Jews who were segregationists. What do they say? Jews are just like everyone else, only more so. So there is a variety of experiences that Southern Jews had during the civil rights period. We move on from that and we talk about a little bit about Jews specifically in small towns and what that was like. And I show here this proclamation. This is from the mayor of Lake Providence, Louisiana. It's a little town just on the other side of the Mississippi River from Vicksburg. And in this proclamation, if you can't read it, it's all about the death of Mrs. Ray Stockner, Jewish woman in town who was like so beloved by everyone that the mayor has put out a proclamation during her funeral. All the stores are going to be closed, where the whole city is going to come out and honor this woman. So it's just a wonderful little example of acceptance of the Jewish community in this one little town, but it serves, you can see a larger story of how Jews integrated into these little towns and really made powerful friendships and contributions. We talk about popular culture. How does the rest of the world see Southern Jews? Well, they've seen them in things like Driving Miss Daisy. They've read about Jews when they read To Kill a Mockingbird. There's Mr. Levy steps out on his porch in that book and he yells at the KKK and he says, I sold you those sheets. When they read Faulkner, when they read Twain, they see Jewish characters. And so Jews have been within the popular culture part of those cultures, sometimes accurately, sometimes not so accurately, most often shown as sort of a mythical figure that can moderate between black and white, the black and white communities, sort of like a sage, magical in a way, because they're the people of the book. And then Mardi Gras here in New Orleans, we couldn't resist. Mardi Gras is a Christian holiday for the most part. I mean, it's the day before Ash Wednesday and the beginning of Lent. When Mardi Gras clubs and parades and balls started, Jews were not a part of that. They were excluded. Today, there are two Jewish parading organizations for Mardi Gras. There's Crew de Jew, and this is one of their bagels that they paint. This is a real bagel. They paint them gold. They toss them out when they're marching down the street to the crowd. And there's Crew de Michigas. So it's a wonderful, I mean, when you're talking about the Southern Jewish experience writ small in New Orleans itself, the Mardi Gras story of Crew de Jew and Crew de Michigas are just great, great stories. Here are some Southern Jews that people may not realize were Southern or Jewish. I think Kinky Friedman, probably most people would peg him as Southern and Jewish, but folks like Goldberg, the wrestler, he's there at the bottom, born in Oklahoma, or Dinah Shore from either Kentucky or Tennessee. I can't remember right now. Tony Kushner, the author of the writer of Angels in America, and whoops, sorry, push the button. Born in Manhattan, but moved when he was just a few months old with his family to Lake Charles, Louisiana, and lived there until he went away to college. So definitely a Southern Jewish experience. As we get to the end of our exhibit, we give people a chance to take a deeper dive into the state or the city that they want to look at. They can sit down on one of these stools, and they can use these touch screens to explore different states, different cities, learn a little bit more about what we have in our collection from those places. So for instance, so you sit down and you can start pushing on different states there. Those are our 13 states. In our Encyclopedia of Southern Jewish Communities, we have, this is just an example. This is Florida. If you hit Florida, these are the communities that you can then further explore with more stories. So there's plenty of things to learn about and see. And finally, there is our community quilt interactive. Remember that quilt I was telling you about and that metaphor. So here at the end, we like our visitors to sit down and make their own quilt square, right? They're not sewing it with needle and thread, they're using a touch screen, but they're selecting fabrics and patches and designs that say something about their identity and their community. And then they push a button and their quilt square gets placed into the middle of the table. The more people that participate, the larger the quilt gets, the more complicated, the more beautiful, the more creative, the more crazy. It's a crazy quilt after all. But it shows that everybody, whether you're Jewish or not, Southern or not, no matter who you are, you've got something to offer the community to make it stronger. And that's the universal message of this museum. Sure, we love telling stories about ourselves, but this museum is not just for us. It's not just for Southern Jews to get excited about seeing ourselves up on the wall. It is to tell a larger story about the promise of America. And this quilt interactive is a great way, fun way, to help people visually understand that. So why Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience? Well, I just mentioned that that's our main mission, but I will also say that to help maintain and to strengthen our communities and make them safer for Jews in a lot of ways, we have to recognize that there are and have been there's been growing anti-Semitism in this country over the past number of years. And that has to be recognized. And so the museum is here in some ways to introduce the Jewish experience to folks across the South and across the country who don't know much about Jews and their contributions to America. The number of hate groups across the United States has been growing, and you can see not just in the South, but you can see certainly that the South has a lot of those dots. So we are pushing back. We are one of many agencies and organizations and museums that are pushing back against this kind of hate. And here's what a few people have said to us over time. I hope this museum will help bridge divides that linger between some groups in the South and indeed around the world. I would love to see the museum focus on the strength that comes from the diversity of a community. Find ways to attract non-Jews to the museum. The lessons of tolerance and acceptance are universal. So we've taken all of these ideas and put them into a experience that people can learn from, engage with, and enjoy. And my favorite quote of all is from one of our board members who grew up in a very small town in the Mississippi Delta and now lives in Atlanta. She said, "The Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience is the finest reply to the often heard comment, 'I didn't know there were Jews in the South.'" So I just love that, having grown up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That speaks to me, definitely. Now, I don't like to do fundraising on these things, and usually the hosts don't like me to either, but I will say that we have a wonderful opportunity for people to be in the museum by sending us a mezuzah that we put up on our Mezuzah Society wall, and we send them a MSJE commemorative mezuzah. If you're interested in being part of the museum and saying, yeah, I'm in that museum, then you can contact us about the Mezuzah Society. If you want to follow along with us and find out about our programming, about our Zoom, programs that we do for the public, about our online store and special deals or whatever, you can sign for the Southern Schmooze, which is our monthly newsletter. You just go to the website, you put in your name and your email address, and we will send you that. And finally, I'll just leave you with my email address at the bottom. It's kenneth@msje.org. You can email me anytime. You can go to our website to learn more. And I think, boy, I am really proud of myself because I think I'm at like 42 minutes. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if y'all have any questions, comments, or stories to share with us.
It's, yes, thank you, Kenneth, for an engaging conversation about the museum and Southern Jewish life. And we're compiling some of the questions, but anybody out there, if you have more questions, please feel free to ask them to the Q&A moderators. And we'll see which ones we can get to. And if not, Kenneth shared his email, so I'm sure he would be happy to, speaking for him, but I imagine he'd be happy to answer any we don't get to. There's been several questions I've seen that are asking about exhibits that you didn't mention, or maybe ideas that you have for the future. For example, if you have any exhibits on on Black Jewish communities in the South, and or crypto Jewish experience or communities in the South. Do you have any thoughts or?
Great questions. And when we were designing the museum, when you design a museum, it's sort of like writing a book or making a documentary. You have to make choices. We have this much space, this much budget. How are we going to tell the story? What are we going to say? What are we going to leave out? What are we going to wait until later? So we were very conscious to include women's stories and Jews of color, because Jews of color, I think there's maybe 11 to 12% of American Jews now identify as Jews of color. And so we have representation in our museum, but we have a special exhibit gallery also that I haven't talked about. That's where we will have changing exhibits. And we have an exhibit on our schedule. It will be, the exact dates haven't been set, but it will probably be in 2024. I know that sounds like forever from now, but it's really a blink of an eye. So we're going to be doing a special exhibit about that. The crypto Jews, we don't have anything on that in our exhibit, but I am working with people in St. Augustine, Florida, who have extensive archives and research on that. And we're always looking to add to our website content, to our collections. We're still collecting things, for our collections, and possibly for future exhibits. So that's my answer to those questions.
Great, thank you. Do you have resources at the museum for genealogists to do research, or like family stories?
So remember that third floor I was talking about? We have this plan to right now we're not an archive, we're a museum. Our collection has a lot of archives in them, and we see a space for this museum to become a regional archive of excellence. We don't have the space for it now. That's why we're really coveting, even though we're not supposed to covet, that third floor space. So what we have in our collection right now is what people have donated to us. So we don't have the kind of archival things that the American Jewish Archives has, or that, let's say, the Bremen Museum in Atlanta has. But we do have growing materials, and depending on the family you're looking for, we may very well have materials that you can search. Of course, the gold standard these days is Ancestry. You know, you pay them a monthly fee, and there are billions and billions of ships manifest records and census records and all those things. We'll never be able to compete with that, but we are hoping to find a place specifically about Southern Jewish families to invite people to do their research.
Great, thank you. Yeah, one of the other questions I was actually going to ask was what you were thinking about doing on that third floor. So nice to hear.
Yeah, we'd love to have a research center up there, have more of our collections available for the public and for the researchers to come and do some hands-on work with some of our collections, as well as have more exhibit space.
Great, thank you. Is there anything in the museum that discusses sort of a Southern Jewish history and the relationship with Israel? I know somebody asked a question, but I actually lived in Houston for a while. I know, synagogues were formed and communities were completely changed, and especially in the 40s around the Israel questions at that time. Maybe
so, just to make it personal, I grew up in Baton Rouge. Baton Rouge has 2 Reform congregations. Baton Rouge doesn't really have enough Jews to successfully have 2 Reform congregations, but it has since the late 1940s. Guess why? Not just over the Zionism, but older Central and Western European Jews who had come 3, 4, 5 generations earlier, encountering newer Eastern European Jews who were more traditional, more Orthodox. Sometimes there was interreligious friction. And then with Zionism, should we recognize a state of Israel? Well, I don't know. We're Americans. We've worked so hard to become Americans. Do we really want to be pushing this idea that there's this Jewish nation that might be bad for us? So there were differences of opinions in the South, and in the South, where Reform Judaism took on a special kind of church-like identity to fit in better with organs and with choirs, and you can't wear a yarmulke, and we're not going to take the Torah out and speak in Hebrew. There was a lot of that in the earlier part of the 20th and mid part of the 20th century. There were splits in communities, and so the answer is yes, we do. We have a wonderful case that has newspaper stories from different Southern newspapers about the Zionism debate that was going on mostly in the early part of the 20th century. We don't spend a lot of time talking about more contemporary Israel issues, Palestinian issue, things like that, because the Southern experience doesn't differ so much from the general Jewish experience in America. So we do cover Zionism, not so much more up-to-date modern things.
Great, thank you. I've seen a few questions come by that asking about the design of the museum itself. If there's anything additionally you want to say about the design of it. And some have asked who were the designers and fabricators. Is there anything further you would like to
Yeah, so in my many years working at the World War II Museum, I worked on a lot of exhibits, most of the exhibits with Gallagher and Associates. They're a world-class museum design firm. They did the Jewish Museum in Philadelphia, the International Spy Museum, museums all over the world. And as a matter of fact, they're located up in Silver Spring, so they're very close to y'all. So we worked with Gallagher and Associates for a lot of the exhibits, and we worked with an outfit called Cortina Productions, which is in McLean, Virginia. You guys are like in the center of the museum world up there, to do a lot of our audiovisual and interactive electronic exhibits. Everything was then built by a local outfit called the Solomon Group. They've also built exhibits. First the designer designs them, then the builder or fabricator makes them. So Solomon worked with the World War II Museum a lot as well, and we were happy to be able to work with a local group to have our exhibits fabricated locally.
Great, thank you. There's several questions. Again, I know you mentioned at the beginning about which states you chose, and I imagine addressing it. There's several questions again about what states being chosen, such as why Kentucky was in your orbit, even though it was not part of the Confederacy. And I don't know. I know you mentioned that it was kind of the state you chose. I don't know if you have anything further.
Well, in truth, we inherited these 13 states from the original museum's geography when the museum was in Mississippi. And so this is what they've always kind of covered. So I didn't really have I wasn't part of the choice to do that. But the question is the South the Confederacy? Are they equivalent? Well, I don't know. Is Oklahoma wasn't even a state. It was Indian territory during the Civil War. So, like what really makes the South? Is it the Mason-Dixon line? Well, not really. Maryland is below the Mason-Dixon line. Well, is Maryland the South? Well, maybe. Is DC the north of the South? I love that famous line that DC is a city of what is it? Northern hospitality and Southern efficiency. So, it's like right there in the middle. So that no one is wrong if someone says, Missouri, you should have included Missouri because St. Louis was so important, such an important, part of the Jewish experience across the South, which is true. Some people have said, oh, Southern Florida, that's a bunch of Jews from the Northeast. That's not the South. But I beg to differ. There are some wonderful Jewish stories from the south part of Florida. Even very fun things like Jewish gangsters who were running molasses from Cuba during Prohibition and starting the citrus industry back in the 1920s. So there's some. Anyway. That's not an answer, but that's my answer.
Great, thank you. I guess just as a couple of sort of concluding questions, I'll ask them together in case they're linked at all, but you can separate them back out. But do you have, some people are wondering if you have a favorite exhibit. I know you mentioned the quilt, but if there's something else, and if you have any books to recommend as future learning for, our participants often love to continue to learn. So
sure. Well, the quilt, I love it. The bagel, I love it. So that's why I include them in my presentation. When I was in graduate school at Tulane, I wrote a thesis on the Jews of Port Gibson, Mississippi, and I used that as a case study for small town Southern Jewish communities. And I found a fundraising letter that the congregation wrote and sent out to bigger congregations around the country found was sent to Temple Bethel in Detroit, Michigan. And the letter basically was asking for money to help build a synagogue, because there had been Jews there for several decades, but they had met at the at the Masonic Hall or in someone's private house for services, and now they wanted a synagogue. And the letter had some really interesting things in it. It said basically, our Christian neighbors think all we care about is our business. They keep asking us, why don't you have a church of your own? For our children's sake, help us to raise money to build a synagogue. And what I find fascinating about that is the Christians in Port Gibson weren't asking the Jews, why don't you come and join our church? Why don't you become Christian? They were saying, okay, you're Jewish, that's cool, but how come you don't have a church? How come you don't have a place to pray? And so the Jews of Port Gibson, by becoming more religious, by becoming more Jewish, by building a synagogue, they were becoming more Southern. They were fitting into their communities more by becoming more Jewish, not less Jewish. So I just love that juxtaposition and complexity that comes with being Jewish in the South sometimes. As far as reading books, we happen to sell books online in our store. There's a great Eli Evans, who was a great writer of the Southern Jewish experience. He grew up in Durham, North Carolina. His father was 5-time mayor of Durham, North Carolina. And he's written about the experiences of being Jewish in the South. So I would definitely suggest that. There's a brand new biography of Judah Benjamin that just came out like a month ago by James Traub, and you can find it online. And it's a really interesting, again, look at the complexity of this Jewish character woven into the Southern story and the American story. So that's just two possible suggestions.
Great, thank you. And thank you again for this very engaging and informative presentation. I'm sure everyone has appreciated all that you've brought to the conversation. And for those of you, thank you all out there for joining us. And we'll include in a follow-up email, these book recommendations and any other materials about the museum. So you don't need to scramble to write it all down right now.
And please reach out to me with any questions you have. We are coming to the end of the year, so if you're looking for that big old tax break, we might be able to help you with that. Oh, hey, Maury, I see Maury Cohn is on from Overland. Good to see you. This has been a treat and a pleasure, and I'm so happy. Happy Hanukkah and happy holidays and happy New Year to everybody. Stay safe, stay warm, and come down to New Orleans and visit us.
Yeah, yes, thank you. Yeah, hopefully many of us will have a chance to do that soon. And just as a little follow-up for those of you that are still with us, we have we're hoping to have we'll have a couple of programs in the spring of next year on Southern Jewish life. One with a professor at Rice University, Joshua Furman, and another one with Josh Parshall, who is the educator for the Institute for Southern Jewish Life. So we're going to sort of continue this series of talks, and we have a couple more coming up in the next few weeks. So check out your email and everything, and we'll see you again soon at one of our upcoming programs. So thank you all, and thank you again, Kenneth.
Bye.